Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushion.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the cheap apartments of Denver.
Cheap?
Well, relatively. Oh, shoot. I meant to grab a drink. Can you just, riff for a while off the top of your head for a second? I'm going to go pour myself a drink.
Sure, James. Absolutely. Happy to do so.
Cool.
Okay,
just,
James.
Just talk.
James, I want to tell you a story of one building. And this is a building that you probably don't think about, that you probably haven't really heard of. This is 2601 North Alcott Street. It's okay that you don't think about this building that much, but this building, I think, encapsulates the tremendous story of rent, housing density growth that we have lived through in the past decade or so in Denver. So I wanted to start with this parcel of land. In 2015, there was a large, mostly vacant lot in the Jefferson Park neighborhood. The sort of edges of this lot would really be Alcott Street and Bryant Street on the east and west, and then 26th and 27th Avenues on the north and south. In the previous few years to 2015, the lot had been used as surface parking, staging for construction of some modest apartments on the block to the north of this block. This lot is only about a mile as the crow flies from Union Station. It's where the old La Loma restaurant used to be for 40 years, if that helps people think of the right place. In March of 2015, a New York-based development company, Tesla Development, bought the entire block, 2.6 acres, for $17.75 million. That's a lot of money, but for context, that is not an unheard of price for a wealthy person to buy a single mansion in Cherry Hills Village these days. But 2015, in Denver, an auspicious time, Union Station had been fully renovated and canonized as Denver's living room. The Denver Broncos were starting their last Super Bowl winning season just a couple blocks down the street from this vacant lot in Jefferson Park. But the story of the year, of course, is growth. By the end of June 2015, compared to the end of June 2014, the city's population had grown year over year by nearly 2.8%. The city added 18,347 people, according to census figures and reported in the Denver Post. By the end of calendar year 2015, according to the Denver's Office of Economic Development, the city added 19,000 jobs, representing a one-year employment growth rate of 4.3%. That's huge, well above national average. In that same report on economic development in 2015, Denver's median rent for all apartments, and gird yourself to hear this is back in 2015, was $1,241. But that actually represented a 15% increase from the median rent at the end of 2014. That same year, Denver Post reported a two-bedroom rental in Denver averaged $1,420 per month. Nice. Denver's median home price in 2015, that was a cool $315,000 compared to today, it's $605,000. So that was 2015. Over the next few years, Denver continued to grow in both population, employment, reputation. Nikola Jokic becomes a starter for the Denver Nuggets. Apartments north of this vacant lot in Jefferson Park finished construction. La Loma moved to downtown Denver and started fighting with its family members about the rights to the name. In 2018, that's when Confluence Tower opens, 34 stories, where else, at the confluence of Cherry Creek and the South Platte River. This skyline-defining project was so significant, I think, for a lot of us in how we started to see and think of the city and understand growth. But also in 2018, a multifamily building and hotel development all in one building was proposed for that big old lot in Jefferson Park. By 2019, there was a report that the city had out, done by Root Research, that estimated that over the previous decade, from 2010 to 2019, the city had only created 33,962 new rental units, and that half of those units had been delivered in the past 2 years. But that's compared to the end of the decade. According to reporting in Denverite, the city's population had grown nearly 20%, adding more than 115,000 residents. In 2021, the proposed development in Jefferson Park broke ground. The average rent at that moment for a two-bedroom apartment had risen to $1,820, a $400 increase in just 5 years. Politicians had been running on the preceding few years on miraculous growth, game-changing growth, but they weren't doing that anymore. They were talking about a crisis in housing costs, in rents, in evictions, in an exodus of poor and working-class Denverites, in gentrification, economic pain for residents. Crisis, crisis, crisis. But by the time that 2601 North Alcott Street opened for leasing in 2024, it was clear that the big change in the city was afoot. This building alone, which is only 15 stories tall, not nearly half as tall as the Confluence Tower, contains 533 rental homes. It is the single largest high-rise apartment complex in Metro Denver by unit count, not by square footage, really. The single largest high-rise apartment complex in the whole metro area actually only comprised 2.6% of the nearly 20,000 apartments delivered in 2024. So it was the biggest drop in the bucket, but just a drop. As JP Morgan characterized in a report later that year, it was a staggering increase in rental supply, a 4.8% increase in total inventory in just one calendar year. So maybe this is like too many numbers for you. Let me just do it without numbers here. Here's the quick story. Denver has historically been a growing city, and with growing rents in the city and a market where the city has tried to make it easy to build, in the last few years, by growing Denver's housing supply, Denver's rents are down 8.5% from their peak. But these rent decreases are not evenly distributed. It's the case that there are buildings out there that are nicer and newer and maybe fancier with gyms and pet washing stations and concierge desks. We would call those buildings Class A. The oldest, least amenitized apartment buildings, Class C, have seen their average rents drop to $1,562 a month. That's a drop of 11% just in the last calendar year. So it's actually cheaper right now, due to these market forces, for someone to rent an average Class C rental product here in Denver than to be renting something that is capital A, income restricted, affordable. So, dear listener, I want to just stress that we have gone through a big change, and that change can be characterized in lots of ways that are sort of using short-term language. We've had an explosion in housing growth. We've had a, huge drop in rent. We've had, a blip, in terms of the rise in rent and then coming back down. There is still the case that the long-term story is that this is a more expensive city than it was in 2015, but it's coming pretty clear at this point that YIMBYs were right.
Whew, all right. Sorry, I just, got really thirsty. Were you able to just talk off the top of your head about a random subject?
I just sort of came up with something on the fly. Yeah. That's fine. James, let me put an exclamation point on this, right? Monday on this week, May 4th, Denver City Council took its most pro-renter, pro-business, pro-growth vote in about the entire time I've lived here in Denver. Rather than rest on our laurels with how much housing has been built in Denver in the last few years, the city has voted to extend the opportunity for another 20,000 units to sort of build when the time is right for them in the next few years here as well, because we've just seen it actually has worked to build a lot of units in Denver. It has cooled rents considerably at all levels of the market and actually reduced rents overall in other sectors of the market. I just think that's like a huge win, and we haven't talked about it on the pod at all, and wanted to talk about it with you today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what I hear you saying is, all right, so we saw this 20,000 units delivered in 2024. There's 20,000 more units that were waiting to be built, that they had their plans approved and everything. They're waiting for the time to start building, and that time was about to expire. City Council said, actually, you get another 3 years before we actually make this expire. Couple questions. What's the problem with letting them expire and just reapplying? And two, why haven't they started building?
So Denver's going to grow again at some point. I'm sure a lot of people who could reasonably listen to this would think, well, yeah, but we don't have the population growth that we used to have. Well, that was true in 2010.
Yep.
And then 5 years later, we added, fully like several percentage points of the city's population in the space of 1 year. Denver's going to grow again. And waiting until the crisis hits and rents start increasing 15% year over year is not the best way to run a market. So at some point in the next few years, interest rates are going to come down. It's going to be attractive or sort of make sense. It's going to pencil out, as they say, for developers to break ground on the apartment building that they had planned maybe 4 years ago. When that happens, rather than wait for the 15% year over year, propose new projects, as I illustrated with the 2601, sometimes it takes a long time for these projects to come to fruition. Maybe we can moderate rent growth Like, we'll actually have a healthy market. Rent will grow, but maybe grow around the rate of inflation. So, similar to the cost of living increases that you might receive, or the sort of minimum wage ordinance that goes up every year as the cost of living goes up.
If you're a developer, you've got your, 400 unit apartment complex that you want to build. Why would you not want to just go through the process again? Other than the headache, right? Other than like, oh, it's annoying to pay the fees. It's annoying to do the thing. You've got your project. Why not just resubmit that exact same project?
Expanding housing affordability, EHA.
Therein lies the problem, is that we passed what is, sometimes controversial, but like a rule that if you build over 10 units, 8% must be affordable. And that puts additional burden on the home builders to build those homes. And so a project that might have penciled out and might have made sense when you didn't need to provide more or less subsidized units no longer makes sense if you suddenly have to make sure 8% of those are affordable. That is a challenge, right? We were talking about this a little bit earlier, kind of just like a battle of values. We as a society value low-income kids playing with kids of high-income families, and we value the integration, right? And there's good reason to. Lower-income families who are around higher-income families end up with more opportunities. The high-income families end up being more reliable voters for social programs that we all want, right? So you kind of are paying for those long-term desirable social effects by increasing the price of these apartment buildings and therefore the rents on the non-subsidized units. So EHA can provide a lot, but it does make things a little bit more difficult. And then there's this other component, which is that when we passed this law,
which was April of 2022 is when they took the vote in council. And I testified in support.
Yes. The federal funds interest rate in April of 2022 was 0.330%.
It was basically saying, give anyone you want money, and they'll probably make money with it.
Mm-hmm. By the end of the year, the interest rate, that same rate, was 4.33%, a full 4% higher. And so suddenly, when it once was extremely easy to build apartments, now financing those apartments, those exact same apartments, became significantly more difficult. So everybody had these applications in, they had like a plan for building, but all of those plans got stymied because interest rates and construction costs and other things went sky high. We are now in an environment that is a little more stable. Today, that rate is 3.64%. So it's a little cheaper to build. It's not that 0.33%. And so some of these projects will just never get built, right? Because like they were right at that edge. But as we see that rate continue to drop, as we see us continue to return to a more traditional, more stable market of construction costs and labor costs, some of these projects will continue to make sense to be built. And so things that were in the queue for 4 years, suddenly, boom, we can deliver another few hundred units to the market, which, as we've seen, has delivered a staggering 8% drop in rent costs across the board, with those costs being even lower for people who are renting cheaper, less amenitized units.
Yeah, and I'm glad, and it should just be said, I'm proud of council members for taking the vote that they took. I think it would be sort of easy for a disingenuous person to come along and to say that all 20,000 of these units that were in these hundreds of proposals for developments need to go back into the back of the line and go through EHA. Someone could genuinely dogmatically believe that. That person would be having to deny the evidence that actually when you deliver a lot of housing at once, it does decrease rents. And that's just like what we've seen. It's just happening not just in Denver. We actually had this happening in many cities at once. So Seattle, Austin, Denver, all built a glut of housing during the pandemic and sort of coming through the pandemic with the sort of help of low interest rates and years of sort of efforts to try and make it easier to build in those cities, Washington, D.C., places like that. And obviously there's differences in those submarkets. There's a very different job market in Washington, D.C. these days than there used to be. But all of these places where they built a lot of housing all at once in the last few years have been able to moderate their rents. And places where they have not built a lot of housing in the last few years, LA, for instance, San Francisco, New York, the rents are going way the heck up. The same as they were in 2015 in Denver. When you only build a couple thousand units every year in a big city, you don't nearly keep up with the growth in household formation, the growth in population, the growth in demand, and people bid up the price. And you just have to be disingenuous at this point to deny that. And I'm grateful that council could see factually, mathematically, statistically, that taking this vote is good for renters. Taking this vote is good for poor people and working class people in Denver. That vote is going to make it possible for the city to stay more affordable, not necessarily affordable overall, but more affordable for longer.
Talk to me specifically, because I think that the focus of this conversation should be on the poor people who have been more or less driven out of the city. We are seeing rents go down across the board, and by delivering on these market rate non-EHA homes, 20,000 units, we might see those rents drop more. But that comes at the cost of 10% affordable units, right? 2,000 affordable units because of the 10% of those 20,000. Talk to me a little bit about, if we're looking specifically at that lower income bracket, how do we make sense of this? What's the best thing to do to support those families and bring them back into the city?
I'm really glad that we had our conversation with Jason King just the other day, because I think what it illustrated to me, hearing him talk for a while, is that mission-driven people have stayed mission-driven in Denver and in other cities. And so affordable housing, capital A, affordable housing, income-restricted affordable housing, where they use formulas to derive what they can ask for rent based on certain income levels and things like that are sort of separate. They're not responding to vagaries of the market, but they're sort of trying to protect people's ability to pay. Those buildings are going to continue to get built for a lot of reasons, not least of which is that they are politically popular at this moment in time to sort of support and to build. The sort of margin, this is always what EHA was always going to be. It was always about delivering some more income restricted units on the margins, right? The margin of affordability delivered by a hypothetical 2,000 units that would hypothetically go back through the pipeline and go through EHA is not nearly as significant an effect on the market as actually just delivering a healthy amount of units in the first place.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't want people to hear this think I'm some dogmatic capitalist. I'm not. It's just the case that everything that people had been talking about, we're just seeing it observed right now in Denver. Filtering. We've talked about this, I think, once or twice on the show before.
Right. It's a really important concept, so just break it down for everybody real quick.
Filtering is really simple. If you've got two different renters, one of whom is higher income than the other, and you have a market where rental properties are scarce, and so there's only a set number of units that are close to both of these renters' jobs, both of these renters' families and amenities and attractions where they want to go, one of them is going to outbid the other. If you are able to build more housing, even if the new housing is really high cost, the person who makes more money isn't going to mind paying a slightly higher cost for a slightly nicer building, maybe slightly closer to their friends, maybe slightly closer to the place where they work, and stops bidding up the price for the lower cost item. And so this is just what happens. Filtering works this way, where people who don't have the ability to pay more money, the money that they'd be comfortable to pay to live in a place close to their job, pay more money than the poor person's willing to pay to live in a not as nice apartment close to their job. That's what's happened. Class C is not a sort of smear campaign against certain apartments. It's just like people land in certain neighborhoods in Denver because they're close to work. Because they're close to other friends, because they're close to concerts, because they're close to jobs and restaurants. If everybody who lands in Denver chooses the cheapest place to live, they're going to outbid the people who have to work at the restaurant, who get to work at the concert venue. So you need to build opportunities for people to just choose a place they want to live, not where they have to choose the lowest cost option.
Yeah.
The vote, again, was courageous. The vote that they took on Monday, because what would a landlord have wanted city council to do on Monday? They would have wanted city council to vote no.
Right.
Because they make more money when there is a scarcity of the thing that they're selling, which is housing. This was a courageous vote.
Yeah.
Landowners, they are vocal. Homeowners are vocal. Local landlord companies are vocal. And to say, I support renters, which is what they did by taking this vote, is, I think, really significant.
Yeah. Well, I think that we can belabor the point, but we don't need to. I think just like looking forward, right? We're going to see some percentage, probably, of those 20,000 units get delivered. But then we still have this other thing. It's just like EHA still exists. What do you see as kind of some long-term outcomes of both of those?
I think the city has ended up playing this very well as far as, they could. If you went back in time with the time machine or whatnot, and you sort of were listening to the press talk about, what are cities that have instituted, affordable housing requirements? What's happened to their housing markets after they did so? Everybody predicted that there would be a drop-off. At some point, it would, and this just has to happen mathematically. The cost of doing the income-restricted units in your private market development projects, there is a cost there, and so you kind of have to wait until the cost of that is covered by the increased value of the product, right? So there was always going to be a drop-off. We always knew that. But we've been able to take pragmatic steps in Denver to say, okay, yeah, let's just let the people that shoved their year's worth of projects in the space of 2 months through the city's permitting system, let's let those people build it if they genuinely want to build it and moderate the cost of rents so that we actually, eventually these buildings will gain in value. Rents will go up, maybe with the cost of inflation, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower some year. EHA is going to work. There are a ton of projects that wouldn't really have gotten off the table without EHA. It's just that those projects were affordable housing developments.
Yeah.
So EHA has really worked for those guys. Sure. EHA has made their projects possible to pencil. It's made their projects bigger. It's made their projects sort of more attractive. EHA, as listeners who listened to the parking episode, a couple months ago, no, EHA was one of several kind of policies that has tried to upzone the city and has tried to reduce the sort of costs of building new things as well. That was baked into EHA. So EHA has worked in that way. It's just that there's a difference in the average rent, the median income, and the people who really need help. And if only 8%, 20 years from now, of rental product is capital A affordable, well, that's 8% potentially of households who every year are getting something produced that could really help them in their life and give them mobility. And that does come at a cost, but that was a decision that the city leaders felt was worth sort of taking.
Awesome. Well, I support that decision. I think it's really cool. And I'm very excited to see how the fact that when we deliver on density and more units, prices go down ends up being true. There's a lot of master students out there writing their thesis on this because there's going to be some really cool research coming out, I'm sure, in the next year or so on this phenomenon exactly.
Thanks for listening. The Denver Urbanism Podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. We look forward to hearing what you think at denverurbanism.com.
What do you want to say this?
What is it?
It's ginger beer?
Oh, I don't like sugar.
Oh, come on. You're fucking gonna flame me like that. I guess it does have 47 grams of sugar.
Okay, well...
that's only 94% of your daily intake.
Yeah, it's ginger beer is
6%.
More sugar than anyone's ever experienced in their life. You could take a ginger beer back to, the year 1402, and, it would kill a person,
Oh, but it's so good.